The moment my husband announced he was leaving me happened on a day meant for celebration. A day filled with pride, joy, and hope. Our daughter's college graduation. I remember standing among the crowd, the sun warm on my face, watching her walk across the stage with her cap shining under the lights. It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of our lives. But as she lifted her diploma with a bright, wide smile, he leaned toward me and whispered the words that shattered everything. He was done, he was leaving, he had filed the papers, and he wanted me to know before the family dinner. It felt like the world tilted beneath me, as if someone had stolen the air from my lungs. Yet I kept my expression steady because I refused to let anyone ruin her moment. Not even the man who once vowed to stand beside me through everything. I didn't react, didn't speak. The pain burned in silence. And maybe that silence was what made him comfortable enough to reveal more later. But what he didn't expect was that I had learned things long before his confession. Things he never imagined I knew. So when he eventually raised his voice and started screaming in anger, it wasn't because I begged him to stay. It was because he realized I was the one walking away. Years before that graduation, the cracks in our marriage had begun forming quietly, like small fractures beneath glass. He had always been proud, sometimes too proud, holding himself above others with a confidence that often masked the uglier beliefs buried beneath. I had ignored the subtle comments that revealed the prejudices he tried to hide, believing that love could soften the rigid edges of his worldview. But as time passed, the mask slipped more often. When our daughter began applying to universities, he insisted she choose schools where she would fit in, a phrase that carried more meaning than he dared say aloud. She didn't listen. She chose a diverse campus where she flourished, surrounded by people who embraced her for who she was, not for how closely she resembled him or who he thought she should be. As she grew, he grew more resentful. Not because she rebelled, she didn't, but because she became more aware of the world than he wanted her to be. She saw injustice clearly, racism plainly, and she refused to let either shape her. He didn't like the way she challenged him, the way she refused to shrink herself to make him comfortable. He especially hated that she grew closer to my side of the family, who had always supported her dreams without conditions. His resentment pooled quietly until it became part of him. And in the end, it wasn't just her he resented, it was me too. I began noticing he stayed out longer, came home later, treated me like an obligation rather than a partner. Our conversations became short, cold, transactional. But the turning point came when a friend of mine informed me she had seen him having dinner with a woman I didn't know. Then again and again. He didn't know I knew. I kept it to myself, not out of weakness but because I was planning, preparing, observing. I wanted to see how far he would go while pretending to be the moral foundation of our family. He even began blaming me for things that weren't my fault, as if creating conflict would justify his departure. Still, I stayed quiet, for our daughter, for her graduation, for the moment she had worked so hard for. I refused to let his betrayal tarnish her achievements. That was why, when he leaned toward me at the ceremony and spoke those words, cold, emotionless, almost relieved, I felt only confirmation, not shock. He explained quickly, almost rehearsed, that he had found someone who understood him better, someone who shared his values, someone who made him feel appreciated in ways I apparently failed to do. I didn't respond. I simply watched our daughter step off the stage, her eyes searching the crowd for us with pride shining in them. I smiled and clapped as if my world hadn't just been split open. After the ceremony, we drove separately to the restaurant for the family dinner. I arrived early to make sure everything was perfect. This day was about her, always her. When he walked in, he carried himself arrogantly, like a man who believed he held all the power. But he didn't know the truth. That weeks earlier, I had consulted a lawyer. I had gathered proof of his affairs, the messages, the photos, the financial transfers. I had already filed my own papers. And because of a clause he had forgotten existed in our prenup, his infidelity meant he forfeited more than he ever imagined. He thought he was leaving me with nothing. Instead, he was the one walking into a disaster of his own making. He didn't know any of this while we sat through dinner, smiling for pictures, pretending everything was normal for our daughter's sake. But the moment she stepped away to talk with relatives, he leaned toward me again, eager to resume the performance he believed he controlled. He said he expected me to move out within the month, that he didn't want things to get messy, that we should be adults about this. And that was when I finally spoke, not with anger, not with tears, but with calm certainty. I told him he might want to check his email before making plans. He frowned, confused, pulling out his phone under the table. The moment his screen lit up, his face changed. The color drained. His hand began to tremble. And then it happened. He erupted. He demanded explanations, hissed accusations, slammed his fist against the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. His voice rose, sharp and furious, drawing the attention of everyone around us. But the louder he yelled, the calmer I became. He couldn't fathom how everything had slipped from his control. He kept shouting questions, how I found out, how I dared to act, how I could turn the tables on him. He was no longer the man announcing he was leaving me. He was the man realizing I had already left him long before he said the words. Our daughter returned just as he reached the peak of his anger. She looked between us, confused and frightened by his outburst. For a brief moment, I saw her childhood in her eyes, those moments when she didn't understand why her father's temper flared. But now she was grown, aware, stronger. When she asked what was happening, he tried to twist the truth, but she wasn't the naive child he still imagined. She saw the truth in his rage, in my composure, in the undeniable shift that filled the room. And in that moment, she stepped toward me, placing her hand on mine, choosing where she stood without hesitation. He left the restaurant after that, still shouting, still furious, still unwilling to accept that the consequences he now faced were the direct result of his own actions. But I didn't follow him. I didn't call after him. I simply turned back to our daughter, and together we finished the evening we were meant to have, celebrating her future, her achievements, her strength. In the weeks that followed, he tried to regain control, tried to fight the legal decisions, tried to paint himself as the victim. But the truth was too solid, too clear, too undeniable. His actions had written the ending long before I ever lifted a pen. And as his life unraveled, I found peace, not in revenge, but in the realization that I had survived betrayal with dignity intact. I had protected my daughter's special day. I had reclaimed my power. And I had freed myself from a man who never knew my worth. Sometimes life reveals a person's true nature at the exact moment they think they are hurting you. Sometimes their attempt to break you becomes the very moment you rise. And sometimes, the loudest scream comes not from pain, but from a person realizing they never